Happy to be here today with David Bianco. It's funny, David and I know each other through IRC, mainly through the Pound Snort GUI channel, yet we had never met and we decided to do a talk. So it could have been an interesting experience. I actually was wondering whether or not we would have just showed up at the same place on the stage and said, "You're Richard, yeah, you're David, okay, let's do our talk now." So what we're going to be talking about today is network security monitoring with Squil. And I asked earlier, but how many Squil users do we have in the audience? So I have a few people who have already taken the Kool-Aid or whatever that's called. The rest of you, how many people here use ACID? Or I should say use the program called ACID. Okay, all right. That's right. That's right. Actually, if you're using ACID, you should probably be using BASE, which is another, how many people use BASE? Okay, how many people use something else? Just shout it out. What do you use?
I was talking to you about it earlier. There's programs that name Anvil.
Oh, Anvil? That has the praying mantis little kung fu thing? Yeah, okay. All right, cool. Well, let's get started. We're going to start with the talk about the problem. What is the problem we're trying to solve? After that, I'll give you a solution, which we call network security monitoring, and then I'll provide an overview of Squil. And then David is going to step up here, and he's going to provide you a case study based on a case that involves the WMF vulnerability. So hopefully you're going to find this exciting. And at the very end, if we have some time, because I'm running Windows here, I have my new Squil VM. Has anybody tried that yet? I built a virtual machine with everything. It's basically a FreeBSD install, all things Squil. You just download it, you run it in VM Player, VMware Workstation, whatever, and you have Squil. So that should make your lives easier. I've got URLs for that. So the problem we have, do you want to know if your network is compromised? So what we're going to do is just give you some of the alternatives. The first thing you could say is, and by the way, I do incident response, I do network forensics. This is a problem I constantly have. I'm not talking about web defacements, I'm not talking about worms, I'm talking about systematic long-term compromise by structured threats. So let's elevate our game, above the common level here. So the first thing you say is, well, you could inspect every host you have for signs of compromise. Well, that just doesn't even scale, right? It doesn't even scale in my own network downstairs in my basement that my dog protects. Right? Where do you begin? What do you check? And do you even trust the results? Because I don't know about you, but I'm not about to take every machine down and do an analysis of duplicated hard drives. Because if you're not doing that level of analysis and you're trusting what's coming off of the host, how do you know you haven't been hit with some kind of kernel level rootkit? So this, to me, is not a viable first-level option, is to simply go straight to host-based forensics. The second thing, and I should say, does anybody work for Symantec here? Okay, either none of you do, or you've been to my previous talks where I ask that question or a question similar to that, and the next thing I do is I slaughter whatever company it is that that person comes from. All right, well, Symantec has a CTO, and she wrote a book where she advocated pretty much a vulnerability assessment or pen testing solution to every problem. Oh, your network is compromised? The first thing I did was I jacked into their network and I owned their active domain, and that was it. And that must be how the bad guy did it, so pay me $5,000. So to me, that is a completely unrealistic way to find out if your network has been compromised. Just because you can compromise your network does not mean anything about whether an intruder actually did it that way. So that's not an option. Well, the final option, I say, is that it makes sense to inspect the network for signs of compromise. Now, there's going to be issues with that. Where do you monitor? What kind of bandwidth you're looking at? There's going to be encryption. But you can at least say, hey, there are a set of systems for me to deal with. Several of these show patterns of traffic, and I'm talking, say, at the IP level, that appear suspicious. Maybe I should then take a closer look. Suddenly you've taken a problem set that might have 10,000 machines and you've reduced it down to a handful. Now you can do your host-based forensics. Now you can do your duplications and so forth. So the question is, how do you get to that? Well, maybe you could run an IDS, or you could run an IPS in monitoring mode. And we all know an IPS is simply a firewall that operates at layer 7. Unfortunately, and this is my IPS rant, IPSs are even worse than firewalls, because we all know a good firewall has a default deny policy, correct? What does an IPS have? It has a default allow or permit policy. They're such integral, important pieces of architecture that they're usually deployed with bypass switches, such that if the IPS fails, just let traffic through. Try that with your firewall. Firewall fails, just let traffic through. So to me, it's completely inverted the model of what we think would be good security. So an IPS, I mean, it has its uses, but you've heard my biases. So let's imagine that we want to find compromised systems, or even we want to proactively find systems before they're compromised and then respond as it happens. Well, if you imagine sort of some of the steps that could occur during exploitation, we have them here, events 1 through 7. And realistically, the one thing the IDS or IPS in monitoring mode is going to try to see is the exploitation. However, that is almost, not always, but it's usually one of the more uninteresting aspects of an intrusion. Things like, what tools does the intruder download once he or she has exploited the box? What type of backdoor is in use? Where does that person go after that? Because once the intruder has a foothold in your site, the way to avoid being detected is not to start rooting other boxes, right? It's to crack passwords, you start using legitimate means of communication, and pretty soon that intruder looks like any other legitimate user on the network. So if you miss that first event 3, you're done. Now, that previous slide, I would argue, even presents a best case scenario. At least the attack was detected by the IDS. But let's think about what you get with the typical IDS. You get a cryptic message about the attack. You usually get a reference to the vendor website saying, you know, something, 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 something. And then click here for vendor. Your system was potentially exploited by an attack of this nature, and see cert for more info. It tells you nothing about what the attack really was, what happened before, what happened afterwards, and so forth. Furthermore, you add in attacks over SSL, you add in insertion evasion methods, or you even go worse, where you're using stolen credentials, you compromise a customer, you even go rogue and you steal from your own company. None of these things are going to be detected by the IDS. Now, my problem I have with security vendors is that they tend to believe these 4 assumptions. First, attacks can be understood prior to execution. Secondly, once you understand those attacks, you can put that attack model into logic. Third, once you have all that packaged up, a person is going to take that product and use it properly and deploy it properly. And then finally, the way you imagine this system would work is the way it works in the customer site. How many of those assumptions really hold up in real life? If you get one, you're probably lucky. All 4 are really what's needed to have a security product work in a manner in which it's going to detect attacks. So the problem is vendors don't accept this. I don't know how many of you are vendors or you've talked to vendors. They don't believe this. They believe they can figure out the world not only better than the intruders, but before the intruders know what they're going to do. And by the way, we can talk about vulnerability filters in IDSs and IPSs, but let's leave that off the table right now. So what happens is vendors field what I call alert-centric products, meaning we know what's going to happen and we will tell you when it happens. Unfortunately, that model fails catastrophically when the alert doesn't happen. Well, we have here the prototypical squeal analyst. Who is that, by the way? That's Elvis. What style of martial arts is he practicing? It's a form of karate. Anybody know? Not Shotokan. No. It's actually very difficult to say because he's using the most ridiculously wide stance in the history of martial arts. It's actually American Kempo. So Ed Parker Kempo, that's his style anyway. Yeah. Anyway, that's all we're going to say about Elvis. This is what Elvis, as the analyst, is going to see, though, if he's doing typical intrusion detection. He's going to get an alert. What other data does he have to look at? Generally more alerts. So he queries for more alerts from maybe that same source IP or maybe to that same dest IP. And what does he get? The same alert. And then that's it, right? If you're an MSSP and this is the situation, what do you have to do? You typically call the customer and ask if they were compromised. And then you ask for the check for $3,000 for monitoring that month. That to me is just completely unacceptable. If you're a security person and this is your problem, what do? You look at the alert and you probably press on because you don't have any data to make a decision. To me, I would go insane. I can't tell you how many times I've turned down jobs at MSSPs because when I wanted to bring the type of data I needed into the equation, they said that's too difficult. We're stuck monitoring the client's ISS sensor, the client's Cisco IDS, and you just don't get the data you need to make a decision. So what I'm going to propose in the next 7.5 minutes is something that I call network security monitoring. And it's based off of Todd Heberlein, who wrote the first network-based IDS called NSM, Network Security Monitor. And I define it as a collection, analysis, and escalation of indications of warning to detect and respond to intrusions. I wrote a whole book about this. There's really no way I can do justice to this subject in 3 slides, but let me just try to give you a snapshot. The whole idea behind NSM is to give analysts the data they need to make a decision. If you don't have data that you need to make a decision, why are you even bothering? And I just realized the slides are sliced on either side, so obviously these will be made available, but I think you get the idea. So the key idea with NSM is that there's 4 types of data you look at. You're not strictly dealing with packets like you would like, I can't tell you how many people simply approach the packet analysis problem by just opening up Ethereal. Has anyone opened Ethereal on a trace that's a gig or a couple gigs or even less? Yeah, maybe try to, or maybe you do it overnight. Somebody told me that, yeah, when I need to analyze a big trace, I just open it up at like 6 o'clock, then I go home and I come in the next morning. So there are different ways to slice this data, and that's what NSM is all about, besides just collecting the right things. You have statistical data, session data, full content data, and finally you've got alert data. Statistical data is a descriptive high-level overview of what's going on. Session data is summaries of conversations, who's talking to who, when, for how long, counts of packets, counts of bytes, protocol, et cetera. Full content is what passes on the wire, and then finally it's the alert. So the reason I present this is the type of data you need to make a decision. Where can you get it? Well, we provide it for you in Squil. Here's what it looks like, just independently, quickly, briefly. You've got alerts at the top, session data, full content data would be something like a transcript. Here I have, looks like HTTP exchange, and then finally statistical data. The important thing to realize about this is we are not tying any one of these types of data to anything else. In other words, people ask, well, I'll just start collecting packets once I've gotten an alert. That's not it at all. We collect alerts independently, we collect sessions independently, content independently, and statistical independently. We also use, well, we try it for as much as possible, different programs to do each one. So if the next big snort vulnerability comes down and it blows away your alert capability, well, you're still collecting session data. Something blows away session data, maybe you still got snort running, and so forth. So let's return to our intrusion scenario and see what might be different. You see that in each case where something interesting happened, with NSM you have more than an alert. All those things that are in blue, those are types of data that I felt would be helpful for an investigation. The idea is, instead of having the analyst get an alert and the alert being the dead end, being the end of the investigation, the alert is the beginning of the investigation. The alert says, hey, you've got a problem, take a look at something. So you see Elvis. Elvis in this case is happier because he gets his alert, he queries his database and says, well, are there any more alerts? Okay, I get the same alert. Rather than stopping as he would with a conventional IDS, he then queries his database for session data. Session data comes back and it says, hey, I see somebody doing outbound FTP. There weren't any alerts because this is a fairly common occurrence on regular networks. However, we see the session. We take a look at the session because we're collecting the control channel. We rebuild it, and hey, we see what the intruder is now retrieving using FTP. If we're in an environment where bandwidth allows, maybe we're collecting the data channel as well. Now we've got a pristine copy of the intruder's tools. This is more realistic than you might think. I'm obviously not advocating you do this on the backbone. You're not doing this on really high bandwidth links. But a lot of people connect to the internet via T1s, T3s. I've done OC3s with this type of thing. It's just a question of how much data you can collect. And I'm not advocating you collect 30 days of full content. Maybe you get 3 days. You get some window, maybe you get a day. You just get some window that you can work with. So you see, this just goes on because you can continue figuring out what's happening. And if I had to pick one type of data that's the most useful, it's session. And thankfully, session data scales very well. You can collect it via NetFlow, via other types of data as well. The key with NSM, it does not try to anticipate attacks. It uses a dumb is smart approach, meaning I don't rely on a system to tell me what's happening. I may rely on an IDS to say, hey, this is something you might want to look at, but once I have a place to start looking, then I use all the other types of data that I have available. This is not a SIM, by the way. I'm not just taking a whole bunch of router logs, firewall logs, and putting them in one place. Because as the guy who wrote Squil said very well, he said, I'm not taking A through W and trying to find something useful. I'm giving you the X, Y, and Z that has the highest probability of having useful data. So speaking of BAM, BAM is Bam Vischer, lead developer of Squil. He started out as something called Sprague in a job we had several years ago back in 2001. Squil's been open source since 2003. We just released 0.60 in December. You get alert data from Snort, session data from SANCP, and full content data from a second instance of Snort. And here's what it looks like architecture-wise. You see that we have a script called log packets collecting full content. Again, you say, hey, Squil, I've got 20 gigs for full content. It just starts a ring buffer and grabs as much as you can. Maybe that's 30 days, maybe it's 2 hours, who knows. SANCP, separate set of code, collecting session data, written by a great guy, another ex-Air Force guy named Johnny Curry. Snort is collecting alerts. It's sending it out in unified format, which is then read by Barnyard. Barnyard, we're patching Barnyard in the current version because we haven't been able to get our code into Andrew to integrate it. So it's sending it out to Sensor Agent Tickle, and then Sensor Agent Tickle is talking back to the Squil server. Squil server right now talks to a MySQL database. We're trying to get Postgres support, but really that requires a little bit more modularity than we have right now. Finally, there's a client that runs on Windows or Unix. You log into Squil, select your sensor, and then you have your interface. As you can see with the interface, we have 3 panes. The bottom one is kind of shrunken down just for space. But you basically have snore alerts characterized by the categorization level 1 through 5. On the right-hand side, you've got packet data. You've got the rule that generated the alert. On the left-hand side, you've got your DNS lookup, status of the sensor, and things like that. The idea is to get as much information as possible on the screen to make a decision, so you don't have to fill out web forms, you don't have to right-click, you don't have to manage 50 different windows that other products might give you. By the way, this is free. I'm not trying to sell it. I'm not even selling an appliance or anything. So let's say you want to query, like there's an alert there that looks kind of interesting, and I want to say, I want to query for session data. I'm bringing this up explicitly because sessions in Squil, there used to be sessions that we got from Snort. This is just where you see sessions, that's a legacy. You should always query for SANCP data. So you run your query, and now you get sessions back. At this point, you are seeing everything that's happened involving the IP you queried for. From here, you can do things like right-click and boom, grab ethereal data. What we do is we pull the full content off the sensor, pull it back to your workstation, throw it into ethereal, and now you're analyzing it with ethereal. If you're looking at something that's an ASCII protocol and it would be easier to read just as English, we throw it in through TCP flow, put it up in a window. Here you can see on the left, this is some C source code that was downloaded FTP. We were just able to reconstruct the data channel, or the data channel. On the right-hand side, this is a control channel. There you go. Now, that was Squil in 20 minutes. You probably are interested to seeing how you can use this in real life. So as I was talking about this presentation in the Pound Snort GUI IRC channel, David came to me and said, hey, I just used Squil to find people that were infected with, or that had an incident relating to the WMF vulnerability. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to David, who will go through a Squil case study, and then we'll come back to me, and I've got a couple things to talk about.
Since we're a little bit ahead, I just wanted to relate a very, very short story. Reminded me of my introduction. This is my wedding ceremony. The priest turns to me and it says, "And do you..." Oh no. So it's not unusual that people forget my name when they come to talk to say me. So how to own 1 million PCs without breaking a sweat. First of all, I just want to know, any in here own 1 million PCs right now that's willing to admit to it? All right. You never know. So this is a case study based on some traffic that I saw in the wild a couple weeks ago. The exploit is based around the WMF vulnerability. This is not about the WMF vulnerability. It could have been, in this case, could have been anything that could be delivered through web content. So I'm not going to really harp on WMF, whatever I think about it or whatever. Also, the particular method of delivery is not unique. We've seen things being delivered. This was delivered through pop-unders. We've seen things being delivered through ad distribution networks and stuff before, especially, I guess, around spring of last year with the GDI vulnerabilities and things like that. So it's not about a new distribution mechanism either. It's about the process that I went through when I saw this come up in my Squil console, about how I was going to go and see how this affected my organization and kind of trace it back to find out exactly what went on. There's a high-level write-up of this in plain English with very, very little technical detail on my blog. Might be useful if you're interested, but you'll get everything. You'll get all the good parts here because we have very detailed technical information. I've obfuscated a lot of identities in this presentation, mostly to protect people who either didn't really have anything to do with it or to protect people who did have anything to do with it but might sue me. There's one domain that I have not obfuscated at all, and the reason is when we come to it, they're really not involved in the attack, but it gives you a very good context of what our user was trying to accomplish in this scenario. So when you come to this domain, don't think anything bad about them just because they show up in my security presentation. So, the beginning of our story. This is our squeal analysis console main screen. In fact, it looks a little bit different than Richard's in the previous presentation because I'm too lame to have upgraded to the 060 yet on my production system. But it's substantially similar and good enough for this. So you can see here, first of all, I'm looking at a bunch of snort alerts at the top, and I've highlighted one, the Metasploit Windows Picture and Fax Viewer WMF vulnerability. So you can see down the bottom, it's pretty much filled out most of the information I need. Now the question is, okay, first question, was this really an incident where I got the Metasploit Windows Picture and Fax WMF vulnerability? So the first thing I can do is just look at an ASCII transcript of the entire session. And here you see this network session is actually at the top of here. You can see they requested CD and affiliate equals 101 from a domain we're going to call in this presentation spf99.biz. And you can see in kind of like the bottom of the red part here where it says an iframe, and it has a source that says the URL spf99.biz, and it ends in a 101.wmf. Now, I don't know when the last time I saw a legitimate WMF thing come over a web interface like this, so I'm thinking probably this was something that I didn't want. But I looked a little bit farther down in the network session, and I'll see a little bit more information. You can kind of see about halfway down the screen on the right, there's some stuff here that indicates that there's a URL inside that WMF file. In fact, you can't see it on this slide because it's chopped off on the side, but it actually has I think it's 1.exe or something like that in the end. So there's no way in hell there should be a .exe URL inside a WMF file, right? If you look on that same line over a little bit more toward the left, you'll see things like urlmon.dll, :n.exe. Pretty good indicators that this was not a false positive. It really was the type of attack it says it was. So the first thing I want to know is, what's the scope of this? What other events might have been generated? So all of our events, as well as all of our network sessions, are in the SQL database. So I just asked Squeal, hey, show me all the other events that might have come from the same host. In fact, I have in my network multiple sensors, and some of them overlap. So you'll actually see 4 things up on the screen. There are actually 2 events because two of my sensors are seeing the same traffic. And if you correlate the source and destination ports and the times, you'll see actually they're all in the same network session. Snort has the ability to emit multiple alerts for the same network session if it sees more than one packet match or more than one rule match, and it did. So we can basically use this to say, okay, as far as alerts go, we've only got just the one alert that we have to deal with. But I also want to know about network sessions. Maybe there was something there that didn't generate an alert, but something that happened that I might want to know about. So, quick query again. We can see all the network sessions that were originated or terminated by the source IP address of the WMF file. And you can see here there's a couple different ones. There's actually 2 different ones. There's this one that has the source port of 33,272, the first one. And then there's the second one, which is actually duplicated again because of my environment. So we're going to, in this case study, just follow the one that's on source port 1070. We also want to check to see what sessions may have been initiated by the victim. So around in about a 15-minute or 10-minute window around the time of the event, we ask for all the sessions that either came from or are going to the victim. And why? Well, we saw that URL, so presumably if that had been a successful exploit, we would have seen some odd network traffic maybe going out to that URL right after the exploit. So I can actually look through here and say in the first few minutes before and the first few minutes after, he's basically hitting the same type of websites on both sides of the event. I did not see the URL being downloaded, so I can probably think, okay, I dodged a bullet. So, but I also cross-check some other sources here. I mean, I don't necessarily think that the Squeal console is going to answer every question that I have to in every situation. So I check the antivirus logs. I'll check the did a manual update of the antivirus and the scan to see, because we'd had some other incidents on site where things had been popped up and blocked by the Symantec virus scanners. And I also want to see things like the URL mon.dll on that machine, or I wanted to check to see if n.exe that was referenced in there really existed. So the good thing is we didn't have any indicators at all. So, whew, good. We're good. But that means now we can have some fun. Who wants to have some fun? Yeah, fun. Okay, for some value of fun that involves looking at HTTP headers. So, but that's the good part, because all the sessions here, this is HTTP attack. In terms of analysis that we're going to go through, this is actually probably the best possible scenario, because HTTP will tell you in the same session set of headers what it's asking for and also where it just came from, the referrer header, if anybody's interested. And you can actually match these up, and you can work your way backwards from the exploit attempt all the way up, and it's like climbing the rungs of a ladder. So we're going to climb the rungs of the ladder in the next few slides here, see what happened. So here's the session data. It's the same session data we just saw a few slides ago, with the exploit session highlighted. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is look at the ASCII transcript again. So I would like to look at the top of this here, and I say, okay, get 101.wmf. That's the exploit attempt itself. Now look at the referrer a few lines down. It's www.spf99.biz/ all that junk. So first thing I'll do is I'll look to say, okay, do I know the IP address of spf99.biz? Yes, I do, because that was the server I was just looking at. So I went to look in the sessions again to find out where I saw that. It happens that this was a session that had 2 requests. So all I have to do is actually look further up at the top of the ASCII transcript, and I will see this thing where it says cd/?affiliate equals 101. And so I've matched the first rung of the ladder. Now where do I go? I look at the referrer again, and here I see www.9. I think I'm calling this cache for popupads.com, spf99/spf99.htm. So now, again, I go to DNS and I say, tell me what the IP address of www.9.cache4popupads.com is, and then I go find it here in my network session list. So it happens to be the one right above the one I was just looking at. So there it is. Again, an ASCII transcript, and you can match up the GET request, spf99.htm, to the referrer, in this case, popunder.cache4popupads.com, and a whole bunch, a really long URL. So again, DNS, what is the IP address for popunder.cache4popupads.com? And you find that in here. And you may, by the way, when you're looking for these, a lot of times it's common that you'll have several network sessions, because the network session for that, that IP address might actually load up a few different things, might actually load several different page elements or something, but you're looking for the root one. So sometimes you might actually have to look through more than one session for the same IP address until you find the referrer as the request. So but here we found the session in the session list for www9, and again, ASCII transcript. So here's the GET. That matches up with what we saw before. And check out the referrer now. We're at a different site, www.htmhelper.com/online icon. I sense we're getting close because this doesn't look like an ad network. Now, if I look through the network sessions again for the IP address relating to www.htmhelper.com, and I find which of those has the request that matches my referrer, I'll find this network session here. And again, if I take a look at the ASCII transcript, you can see, yes, I'm getting online icon from www.htmhelper.com. Now check out the referrer. Anyone have any experience at all with that domain name there? Anybody got kids? Or anybody is a kid? Yeah, pretty popular. So yeah, it came originally because some user was following a link from something that, they were just looking at MySpace pages. That's all they were doing. So let's take a look back up just a little bit to that HTML helper page. So because I have the full content of the page, I got the transcript. So I looked down in the page to see, just for fun, if I could find out what was calling the pop-under ads. And I see that this website actually to be a kind of website that's popular among MySpace people because a lot of kids don't know how to write their own HTML, but they want all these snazzy, rotating, flaming, spinning musical logo things. In this case, they were looking for an icon that could pop up by their name when they were online. So htmlhelper.com had a bunch of sites that had this similar type of thing, and one of them was online icon. If they look at that page, they don't charge anything for you to use the page, but they do have several ad affiliates. And one of them was this cacheforpopupads.com. And you can see here, this is the piece of the page that actually initiated the pop-unders. So as soon as they clicked the link from MySpace to go to htmlhelper.com, it was all automatic after that. So, just for fun, I just wanted to see exactly if that was really the top of the chain. So I looked at the MySpace here, and I matched up the referrer and the request that they got, and it was actually the MySpace page here. And if you look a little bit down on there, you'll see the actual link to htmlhelper.com/online icon. That's how I figured out exactly what was going on, by looking at the HTML of the page as it had gone over at the time. You could see that clearly someone had left a comment, their name was attached to their comment, and it had the little online icon next to their name, because at the time that the event happened, that person was online. If I were to look at the page, the same URL and everything at a later time, I probably wouldn't have seen this, so it's a good thing I had the full content to come back on, because that person wouldn't have been online again at the last, when I checked. So let's put it all together. Our victim is just doing nothing really wrong. He's going to a MySpace page, probably somebody he knows or somebody in the local area. And one of the commenters is online. Their icon says, hey, I'm online, and it's linked back to the site that generated the icon. Now, I don't know why exactly our user felt that he had to click on that. Maybe it was a particularly cool-looking icon and he wanted to copy it. I don't know. But pretty much at that time was the last action he took in that whole chain of events. HTML helper is an ad-supported page, so the JavaScript pop-up came on, brought up the cacheforpopupads.com pop-under window, but cacheforpopupads did not actually supply the content, so he was referred to spf99.biz, and spf99.biz served up the actual infected file, and we actually saw in there that the affiliate code, which is ad jargon for the customer of the ad network, that was provided was number 101. Now, that's about as far as you could easily take it back, and it's certainly as far as you could expect a network-centric view of things to take it back. Who is affiliate 101? I don't know. Could be a person, could be another ad network in a big chain, I don't know. I thought the point was interesting, though, is nobody takes ads for free. So somebody got paid to put that ad there, which means somebody had some money to put into it and wasn't really interested in, they're not going to be paying if they're not going to get some kind of return. So that's pretty much the top of the ladder that you could go to probably for now. I'm not saying it's the only way you could have investigated that, but with the network security model with Squil, we actually had a lot of data, and you could see we used alert data, session data, and full content data kind of all together to do the entire investigation. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Richard.
All right, thanks, David. I think everybody appreciates that. I think this is a really good case because while it didn't turn out to have a compromise, it showed you that without making assumptions prior to the incident, we were able to have all this data. And you could say, well, of course, I could do the same thing if I just was collecting tons of TCP dump data. But the idea is, look how fast he was able to go through this. It was just essentially right-clicking on certain things, getting the data. I don't know about you, but I often operate in environments where I can't use Squil and I have to use other people's tools, and I'm stuck using, say, TCP dump and maybe Argus or something like that. It takes an order of magnitude time greater to do this type of analysis as opposed to using something like Squil. Maybe after seeing this as well, you might think, how could you ever do an intrusion detection related job without having this data? To me, this is the most analyst-friendly thing that was ever created, because you can take someone who might not know a whole lot about security, but say, look, I want you to read these things. I want you to look at this content. I want you to draw a picture. I mean, I used to have my analysts do this. Follow all those sessions, draw it, and see what's happening here. And even if you don't have full content, if you just have sessions, just using the session data to know who talked to who and when, I mean, that's how cops bust, narcotics rings. It's traffic analysis. It's figuring out what's the scope of the incident based on who talks to who. Now, of course, you're all just thinking, I have to try Squil. It's the greatest thing, right? Well, the very, very, very simplest way to do it is, now I hate to say this, but the active state libraries that the active tickle libraries that Active State provides for free are just the brain-dead easiest way to get the Squil client going. You follow these instructions, you get the active state libraries on your Windows box, you connect to the demo server that BAM runs, hey, you're using Squil, all right? If that doesn't work for you, we have a Squil VM. We have both a version that has everything except the client, and then we have a version that has everything, period. If you want to work on your own Squil installation, David has started a project called Instant NSM, where he is trying to take the pain of installing all the Squil components and scriptify them all. And you've got a list there, instantnsm.sf.net. If you want something that's eventually going to go away, because I want to integrate everything I do into Instant NSM, if you want to build a FreeBSD 6.0 system with everything Squil, I've got a little script there on my blog. If you need help, go into our IRC channel. And if you want to know more about NSM and Squil, I have chapters from one of my books at my book site. So with that, I'll take some questions, and I'll try, maybe as we're doing that, I'll try to get the VMs going. But yes, sir.
Don't you guys have a version running under Helix as well? Can't you pop the Helix CD and run it?
As of, I think it was Helix 1.6 may have been the last time the Squil client was on there. I believe they've removed it in 1.7, and I don't know why. But if I'll have to talk to Dave and say, hey, what happened to the Squil client?
Also, the version they have of the Helix CD is the old version that doesn't connect to the public demo server. We have a public demo server on the internet, so if you get a client only, you can connect to the public demo server and categorize events, do searches, look at transcripts and whatever, basically spy on BAM's cable modem. But the older clients won't connect to the newer server, so you'll not be able to use the Helix one anymore anyway.
Sir. Oh, question is, does this run on VMware Player? Yes, I'm booting this in Workstation. However, I tested it on VMware Player and my wife's machine worked fine. We had guys download it and it works fine as well. The only issue with VMware Player is you can't alter the amount of memory it uses. I've only built it with 128 megs of RAM, so in some cases, I mean, you can run it with less if you need to, but you'd have to alter the settings in Workstation. Sir?
On your analysis before, you say everything is fine, you get an alert beforehand.
Correct.
Is there any other way you can use Squil to analyze traffic without having an alert, just looking for that stuff?
Yeah, sure. The question is, what do you do if you don't get an alert? Well, there's something I talk about in my third book, Extrusion Detection, and I call it traffic threat assessment. It's basically a way to parse through session data in a systematic manner to find things that are bad by watching what leaves the network. It doesn't use alerts at all. Can be a real hassle on big networks, but in most smaller enterprises, it works surprisingly well. It's essentially a way where you do giant session queries. You say, what do I think is normal leaving this enterprise? You make assumptions, and then you just keep cutting down until you get to something that is manageable, and then you start looking at full content and so forth.
Actually, I wanted to add something.
Sure.
One of the nicest things, and I think it's kind of under-reported or under-realized until you actually get Squil running on your network, is that just exactly that. You don't have to start with an event or an alert. It's very common, especially if your security team has a good rapport with your system administrators or end users. Somebody will call you on the phone and say, my machine's acting a little weird. And you can just take any random IP address that you're interested in, do a search for alerts or network sessions, and you can start an event analysis that way too. So you don't have to start from an alert. You can start with any way that you get to an IP address, or you get to something that you can search for on the database, a time period or anything like that. You can you can start with that. So it's the most common that we start with an IDS alert, but it's very, very common, at least for me, that I start with something else that's not an IDS alert, and it's also not a packaged report or something like that. So kind of ad hoc.
Is it appropriate to use Squil not as an ongoing monitoring mode, but say as a one-time audit? Test auditing?
I would say that you could if you were interested in, you knew what you were looking for, but mostly probably you would be getting the best benefit of it by leaving it running all the time and dealing with it. It's something that it would certainly be useful. One of the things I hope to do in Instant NSM is to get the PowerBook to run Squil so that like a consultant can go on site with their PowerBook, right, and just deploy it in emergency mode. So yes, I think it would be useful there, but you'll get more use from it if you could run it on a regular basis.
The official word on that law enforcement uses is trap and trace. So you're saying it could be used in trap and trace situations?
Yeah, I think so. Any other questions? Yes.
In some of the larger multi-gigabit throughput places that I've worked at, absolutely positively session data is the number one way to be used to actually do stuff in places where you're essentially statistically capturing packet data for storage because you just can't grab everything. If it goes through that and you miss it, weird session data is the way that we can really follow up on it. For any provision in Squil or SAMCP for analyzing session data proactively rather than reactively and trying to generate any events on that.
Very little at the moment. We have the concept of canned reports that you can set up and run. But at that point, it's up to you to figure out what the report should be that you're interested in doing. And then you could at least semi-automate that, yes, but it's not exactly what you're talking about.
Sir?
Tie Squil to things like an inventory database or a ticketing system to automatically push tickets to, say, Remedy or something else.
Who's here from? What we have right now is there is the provision for sending emails. So if you want to send an email based on an alert, you can do that. We are definitely not a ticket-based model, though. I did some work recently for an MSSP that's using a ticket-based model, and they are desperately scrambling to get away from it as much as possible because, anyway, yes. I can't answer that, thank you.
Actually, there's one thing I wanted to add to that, because one of the nice things about it being open source, and further that it's in Tickle, it's very easy to customize. In fact, in the places that I run Squil, I usually customize at least to add support for querying other data sources. For example, anytime I have an IP address that comes up on the screen, I can right-click it. In addition to doing other database searches, I can also say, well, tell me, if this is a RAS IP, who was logged onto the RAS at the time this event happened, and things like that. So you can script that sort of thing. It's not built in, and I won't say that there's a really easy hook, but you can certainly go in there and add that yourself, and it's kind of not that difficult because I'm no Tickle programmer.
I just want to mention two things before I forget as well. There's going to be a snort BOF in the BOF room, so down the hall. It's not on any of the schedules, but BMC has been saying, hey, get everyone that you can get into the snort BOF, so that'll be down the hall. Second thing is, I started a project, and really it's only a concept at this point and a domain name that redirects a blog entry. But the idea, it's called openpacket.org. The idea behind OpenPacket is I'd like to have a central repository for any interesting PCAPs that people have. It seems like many times when people are talking about data they want to look at, there might be a trace that's posted in ASCII format, but really what we want is something that we can run through Ethereal, run through Squil, run through whatever, run through Snort, and it'd be nice to have a single place to go, both for malicious traffic and then even for comparison purposes to look at normal traffic. So if anybody is interested in that, please send me an email. Really at this point, if you know Plone, because I'm thinking of implementing it in Plone on Zope on Python, that's what I've heard. Zero experience in that myself, but I think it might be the way to go. So if anyone has development experience with that and you want to help, that would be really awesome. I'm seeing the 5-minute mark. Just wanted to mention this is the Squil VM. Very simple. You start it. There's instructions in my blog post to how to get it going. Essentially, you start all the components as the different users, and there's some CAN data that's there immediately. Remember, gobbles love squeal, and so should you. If you ever want to test your snort installation, the dead simplest, easiest way to make sure you're getting snort to work properly is just to netcat to port 22 on some system that the sensor can see, type in gobbles, and there you go. There's still a rule in there that'll check for that, so I love that. Any other questions? Sir?
Another question is, if I have the pickup files already, can I run it to Squil and get everything?
That's a good question. The question is, if I have PCAP data and I want Squil to analyze it, how do I do it? The thing to remember with Squil is it's multiple cooperating components. You could theoretically have each of these components read the files, but the problem is how do you do it in a synchronized manner? What I will do usually is I will simply get Squil running and I will TCP replay. Now, that's going to blow away timestamps because where in the packet is the timestamp stored? Nowhere. Right, it's added by PCAP. So when you run something again through TCP replay, you're going to get headers that are added by the PCAP on the box that was listening. Now, if you're just concerned about what's going on content-wise, that's okay. If you're trying to do some kind of forensic reconstruction, probably not what you want to do. Any other questions? Okay. Boy, I have no idea how to do this because I have these books. I know, sir, you, and who's the BSD user, or somebody else? Yes. Yeah, Mike.
On decent size things, you mentioned T3s, those T3s.
Sure.
For all of these subsequent components, I'm very familiar with storage of database componentry.
Are you sure you know snort? I don't know.
No, actually
Go ahead. All right.
at all. But in terms of the session capture data, what are we looking at? I know that there's no average, but what are we looking at in terms of space? You mentioned 20 gigs as a
Oh, okay. So what are we looking at in terms of ratio of what passes the wire in terms of records? Boy, do you have any idea on that? Or?
Yeah. I capture compressed this very, very well. But what about, session data, I'm assuming just ASCII logs?
Well, okay, just in terms of volume, let me just say one thing. We do have one person that has, what, like 1.2 billion session records in their database? Yeah. By the way, we totally blow away any limitations you see in ACID or base. Right. We are operating, basically, we don't use the scheme of the package with them. So anyway, I'll have David answer.
I was just going to say, to give you a little bit of background for what I have, on our perimeter link, which is OC3, we decided we wanted to have about 3 weeks of full content online at any given time. So we have about a 2 terabyte array just for the full content there, which, by the way, is only $5,000 or something. It's pretty reasonably priced to get 2 terabytes. For alert data, it's nothing. Just you got 2 terabytes, you can put the alert data on there without any problem. Even a small link, you won't really have to worry about the alert data. The session data, I calculated it in part of my Instant NSM project. There's a detailed how-to that I used as a baseline of how to install it, Squil, and all the parts on Enterprise Linux. But one of the things it has in there that is not in the script is it has planning. And as part of the planning, I went through and I said, okay, I know that I have this many session records in my database, and I know that my database takes up this much data, space on the disk. And I calculated it out, and I think it was something like 52 bytes per session record or something like that. So if you can have some way of figuring out how many sessions you have, you can multiply it by 52 bytes. Okay. But it's almost nothing. I mean, all right, we got the big zero. So everybody go to the snort boff, just down the street.
Yeah, Brian Caswell's doing the sport thing at Snortball. Very good.
What time?
Right now.
Right now.
If you want,
right now.
By the way, if you're interested in my books, flyer, if you're interested in class on this, flyer,